the meeting to order. We're expecting B.J. Watts, and he'll probably walk in, doing a long-distance travel here today. Laura Naughton, you want to go ahead and call roll call, please? Here.
Neil Beckett.
Present.
Jim Edwards.
Present.
Dan Elsner.
Present.
David Shane.
Present.
Sarah Bryan.
Present.
B.J. Watts is absent. Gary Licker is absent. And Joe Biden is absent.
Tony Walker.
Tony Walker, sorry.
Thank you. If we could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Superintendent,
Yes.
before we start, I'd like to make a motion that we change the agenda and move adjudication to Roman numeral, basically 8, 7, and then move 7, everything else back up. The reason, when I looked at this, we got it late, but when I looked at this, I would like to have some information from our turnaround groups before we look at adjudication. And so that's my motion, that we just flip those positions. If we get a second from somebody, then that's what I'd like to do. Thank you.
I'll second the motion.
So so the motion is to move adjudication to right after discussion. Is that correct? Okay.
I just want to make sure we have the discussion before we do adjudication.
All those in favor, any discussion on that motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. So adjudication has been moved to after discussion. We have the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
Do I ask about something before there's a motion on the floor or after the motions?
To approve on the minutes?
Yeah, I have one question about.
Okay, during discussion, if you
Okay.
don't mind.
So then I'll move approval.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Discussion of the minutes?
Yeah, so my only question is, it says in the minutes that I abstained from, when it says consent agenda, the motion was made by Mike Pettibone and seconded by Tony Walker. Neil Pickett abstained from voting because his suggestions regarding board procedures were not accommodated. I thought I voted against. Did I abstain?
I thought you did. I can double check.
Okay, I thought I voted against, but if you could clarify that, that's my only question.
Okay.
Thank you. And if I did vote against, then if you could just modify that, and if I didn't, I guess I meant to, but I guess I just abstained, so that's if you could just leave it. Thank you.
Any more discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is the statement of the chair. First of all, I want to welcome Sarah back from her maternity, and congratulations on your daughter, Molly. And I'd like to introduce Laura Naughton as the new state board administrator. And I'd like to introduce Becky Bowman, who has recently been appointed by the governor as the director of special education. Thank you. I'd like to give a brief update on ISTEP and CTV. As you all know, I issued a press release and gave you also a timeline of events that are occurring with ISTEP. We have been in conversation with Dr. Hill and the third party that we have hired to validate the ISTEP data. And we have also been in conversation with CTV to begin dialogue on damages. And so I released information regarding that. So that's a brief update. I know you all have the specifics of that information. We're working on a possible new date for the July board meeting, since July 3rd is like right around the corner. And so we're tentatively looking at July 19. That might be a possible date. It is our hope also that by that July 19th date, we might have information to share with you regarding the validity of the ISTEP test. And if that is the case, I will be inviting CTB McGraw-Hill to address the state board. I would like to give a thank you to the outgoing members of the board and present them with a certificate from the Department of Education. Neil, thank you so much for your service, and please accept this certificate as my appreciation. I put a quote on here that says, "Education is the mother of leadership." I truly believe that it is. It's a quote by Wendell Willkie. Thank you very much.
For Indiana. Thank
Yes,
you
it
very
is.
much.
Thank you. And then Jim Edwards. Appreciation for your service. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you very
Thank you. And I have one for Joe Blacketer, and I will make sure that she receives that. I also delivered one to Mike Pettibone on behalf of the Department of Education as well. Board member comments and reports?
Yeah, I'd like to just say a couple of quick words on my departure. It's been a challenging and interesting 4 years. I very much appreciate Governor Daniels' decision to appoint me to this board, and I am looking forward to my new assignment and responsibility, and we'll continue to work together on the Career Council. But that being said, I will certainly miss my colleagues. It's really been a pleasure to get to know the other members of the board, to work with first Superintendent Bennett and with you, Glenda. So thank you for your kindness and your thoughtfulness. And you know, I just in departing, I'm not going to, you know, wax philosophical, but I will say that my focus has always been about trying to improve the prospects of children. I believe firmly, and nothing I've seen in my 4 years here or the years previous or what I expect to see in the future suggests anything other than the fact that increasingly in this complicated and challenging world of ours, that education is the key to personal and community and societal success. If we don't have a generation of prepared young people who can handle the kinds of jobs that are being created, those jobs will go to other places in the world where people can do it. It's an increasingly competitive world, and it's just a world where more and more the differentiation is based on ability to deal with challenging issues, to manage complex problems, to read and communicate effectively, and to have quantitative skills. So the commitment of this board, the commitment of the department, the focus on trying to ensure that all Indiana children, all Hoosier children, have those skills. There's just nothing more important. There's nothing more significant. There's nothing more valuable that we could do. And we just always have to remember that that's the fundamental goal, and that's the objectives, that we owe it to those kids to prepare them effectively. And we also owe it to ourselves because, again, it's not just a matter of their personal success and personal satisfaction, but our success as a state and as a country that really depends on that. So that's been my focus. That's been what drives me, what motivates me to support the kind of changes that I've supported. And again, I very much appreciate the opportunity to serve. And again, I very much value my colleagues, the collegiality, the open and frank but respectful conversations we've always had. I will miss all of you, and I hope we will stay in touch. You know where to find me, on the Indiana Career Council. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Jim?
I'd like to say a couple of words too. Neil saved me a lot of words because I can second virtually everything that he said. It's been, for me, really a great personal and professional experience serving on this board for these last 8 years. And as I move to what I think to me is going to be an even more challenging situation in raising the bar with you know, the career and technical areas, because that's the future of our state, no question about it. I look forward to coming back and working with you again in the future, and I'm sure Neil and I will have a lot of dialogue going forward as we do this. So I think we have a great opportunity to get this thing right this time. The one thing I can testimony to the work of this board and to all of the other people who've made this possible, the professional teachers and all of that, we're in much better shape to fix this thing now than we were when I first came into this world 8 years ago. So again, it's been a pleasure working with all of you, having the relationship that I've had with most of you in the audience out there, and I'll look forward to continuing that relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. All right. Any public general comments? Having none?
Madam Chair, I just like to make
Oh, go ahead,
a couple
Tony.
comments. The General Assembly tasked this body with several actions and emergency actions that we need to take. So in trying to set a July meeting date, I just think we should be mindful and go back and review all of the bills that passed, because I don't recall what they all are, but there were several timelines that I think were right around July 1st or sometime in July. So if we could just take a look at that and make sure we're in compliance as far as our dates.
First, if I...
Yes, and we're working with the governor's office to be sure that those are completed.
Were they tasked to the governor's office or the board?
Will they what?
The statute call for the board to act on them?
No, we are working, no, they do not call for an action. They call for reports to be submitted to you by July 1.
I thought there was at least one emergency rule that had to be. Is that incorrect? I thought that about the 1003 required an emergency rule by July 1st.
There's an emergency rule, 1003,
The voucher bill?
Special education.
oh, special education, yes. It requires an emergency rule, but not by July 1.
Okay.
Sure.
That is-
We have two things that I'm aware of. We have the Common Core report, which is due to the board and the legislature, due to several entities by July 1. And then 1003, we are to prepare rules. There is no timeline as to when that needs to be completed.
464. It's the other one that someone mentioned, it's kind of technical, it's a physician, something about school districts paying, having to
Something
pay
to do with the
physician.
physician, I think.
464 for what?
Would you just,
Lord, are you familiar with 464?
This is about the payments to the residential facilities for the students.
right,
There's emergency
Yes.
rule in there.
Yes, and the same, there's no timeline.
no time.
How about the 1005? Are we supposed to have something on that? Isn't there something on graduation rates?
Criteria for remediation and waiver rate guidelines.
That is being worked on.
Okay.
I know that. In fact, we've had meetings regarding that, so we're working on that document.
I don't, what...
In fact, we're working with the Commission for Higher Ed on that document.
Good. What would be helpful is to maybe look at these and make sure, and just send us a little memo. 464, 1005, I can't remember them all. It seemed like there's 4 or 5 where we were supposed to do something for July. If I misread it, I apologize. I appreciate Tony bringing it up at this point. I just want to make sure, and there was something to do with the voucher bill we had to do. Need real special ed.
Two items, yeah, 2 items are due.
Special ed children need to
Two
make sure.
items are due as reports by July 1, and that is the Common Core report, and also the remediation, which we're working with higher education on that. And then the others that you referred to are, emergency rule needs to be developed, but it doesn't have to be developed by July 1.
That because of special ed children and the voucher deal, it would be important that everybody know that in the summer so they could be
cor-
ready.
Correct. Well,
These children,
we already have, actually, we already have in place a timeline and distribution of funds, and that process is already set up.
I appreciate a memo going through anything these topics to make sure we all have one understanding. We can see in writing what your understanding is, so we just know.
Sure,
See
no
if there's
problem.
confusion.
No problem at all. Thank you, Tony. Best practices has been deferred for this meeting. Now we'll head into the discussion of the Turnaround Academy's updates. And I think at the pleasure of the board, it was requested that the turnaround operators give some reports. And so we'll call up Ed Power. Are you present? Yeah, I think somebody's coming.
Madam Chair, while they're getting organized to do that, who's the staff person now with DOE that sort of managing the turnaround?
Oh, well, we have a turnaround division, and Teresa Brown, are you present here today? She's out in the hallway. Teresa Brown is our outreach coordinator, which is in charge of all turnaround operations. Teresa, can you kind of step in? Why don't we open up that door, too? Oh, it won't open? Hi, Teresa. Just a quick introduction. This is Teresa Brown, and she is the Assistant Superintendent in charge of outreach. And is Leroy Robinson happen to be out there? He's the Director of Outreach. There you go, Leroy. And so faces for you to get to know. But they will be working with all outreach coordinators and who will be responsible for turnaround activities.
Are they going to be sort of coordinating the reports that we get?
They will be, yes, they will be. Thank you.
What's the whole total staff committed to this then? Teresa Brown and,
In the turnaround, we have Assistant Superintendent and a Director. We'll have 13 coordinators, and then there will be 4 support people at the department, actually here. The 13 coordinators will be housed at the Education Service Centers in the 9 regions. We don't have all of the hires yet. The total cost, Dan, is approximately $2 million, and we are doing that within our budget because we've reorganized the department.
and so these folks are going to work with the turnaround school?
They will be, yes,
So they're working with all schools?
yes. On school improvement, but in particular, they'll be working with the schools that are in academic watch. All right, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Tamara Wright, and I'm from the Mayor's Office, and we just wanted to give a brief overview on turnaround. I'm recently the recently hired director of the Turnaround Schools, and this is Brandon Brown, and Brandon is the director of the Office of Education Innovation, and he was instrumental in facilitating the transfer of the schools from the state to the Mayor's Office.
If you don't mind if I interject?
Sure.
That started in June.
Yeah. Yes.
So it
Our
just-
oversight,
2 weeks in.
2
Right,
weeks
it
in,
just
yes.
started.
Yes, it just started. Our oversight just began. Prior to my role as Director of Turnaround Schools, I was the Governance and Performance Leadership Analyst with the Mayor's Office. And prior to that, I was the Assistant Director of the Upward Bound Program at IUPUI, where we work with 6 target schools, and 2 of those schools happen to be Arlington and Manual. I'm here today to provide an update of our progress prior to assuming the oversight responsibility of the schools in June. And in addition, we'd like to speak to the importance of SIG funding and the potential implications for schools if those funds are unavailable, as stated in the contract that was entered in good faith by all parties. Since the board unanimously voted in February to turn oversight responsibility to the mayor's office, we've been laying the groundwork necessary for us to be effective in our role. That includes working with the DOE and the TSOs to amend and sign contracts to ensure compliance and outline our oversight responsibilities. We executed MOUs with the TSOs that outlined accountability, which includes the adherence to standards as set forth in the mayor's performance framework, which includes academic, financial, and governance oversight, financial resources necessary to provide quality oversight, and site visits to schools to monitor compliance. We've also developed a comprehensive plan that lays out the expectations for operators and the Office of Education Innovation's work in preparing for the upcoming school year. We've completed site visits for all 4 schools with the Deputy Mayor and the Director of the Office of Education Innovation to engage administration, staff, and students. And we've been facilitating weekly conversations with the operators to discuss school performance and needs. In our ongoing conversations with the operators, we have identified the school improvement grants as an essential need for all 4 schools. As you know, each school received SIG awards last year, and these funds are critical for the schools to provide quality oversight and have been used for staffing, professional development, programming such as parent workshops and community engagement, and technology such as equipment and curriculum. So these are critical funds that the schools need in order to provide quality educational options to all students. Given the need to adequately budget for the quickly approaching school year, we hope that the board will work with the DOE to determine a timeline for awarding these much needed grants. And these grants are critically important to the efforts of the operators to provide services ensuring all students receive a high-quality education. Before turning it over to Ed Power, I just wanted to say Charter Schools USA regrets not being able to be here, but since the meeting was rescheduled, they had scheduled a Principals Institute last fall, so they're actually in that institute the entire week, but they will be presenting to the board at the next scheduled board meeting, whether that's July 19th or another date. And now I will defer to Ed Power. Oh, if you have any questions. Sure.
You've made an initial visit to the 4 schools. Any general impressions that you'd like to share?
General impressions, I think I've noticed a culture change, particularly in Arlington and Manual, because those are 2 schools that I recruited from when I was a part of Upward Bound, so that was before the takeover. So in those 2 schools in particular, just a culture change. Just students seem to be more motivated, more engaged. Just the teachers as well, just more motivated, engaged, just really, it seems like very much a team effort in both of those schools, as well as Emma Donnan and Howe. It's just that I have more context with Arlington and Manual. So I think what I've seen, we're definitely headed in a positive direction, which was really, really great to see. You're welcome.
Can you talk a little bit about your plans for next year? You said you've developed plans.
Well, basically what we've been working on is a comprehensive 60-day plan right now to engage the different operators to figure out exactly when we'll be meeting, the different things that we'll be talking about. We really want the process to be intrusive in that we are a constant presence, but we're a supportive presence, even though we are the oversight body. We want the schools and the operators to know that we are all in it together in terms of high-quality educational options for students. So we are also making an effort to incorporate the feedback from the turnaround operators to make sure that the comprehensive plan that we have developed works for everyone involved.
I'm sorry, can I ask, is your plan to continue to monthly updates?
Absolutely, absolutely. Our plan is to provide monthly updates to all stakeholders, including this group, and then also to make ourselves accessible at any point, even if that's not a monthly meeting. If there are any questions or concerns, We view our role as one that's very transparent, so we want to engage the community and the stakeholders and share any information that is requested of us.
While you're up, so maybe we have to bring it back anyway, but one thing I want to be clear of is about funding and timelines. Would you unpack that a little bit more? You said you were concerned about funding and the timeline of funding for planning and implementation.
Yeah. So the school improvement grants are critically important to the schools. Last year, all 4 of the schools received clear notification on what their awards would be in May. And, you know, it's late June right now. We're about a month and a half from the start of the school year. A lot of folks on staff at the state. So a lot of the folks that you actually just mentioned, superintendent, we've been working with. And we're having ongoing conversations around what the timeline for that application will be. And we haven't received a clear answer to this point. And I think working with our schools, not knowing if you're going to be getting $1 to $1.3 million makes it impossible to budget for the next school year.
So last year we knew in May, and now we know what? What do you know now?
There's no clear timeline for the SIG awards.
Thank you.
I know this is a speculative question, so I specifically ask that you answer it that way, but what would be the consequence for the schools of not receiving SIG grants?
Speak about the contract, Tamara.
As far as the contract, I believe it is.
Talk about both the contract, but also.
Okay,
the
okay.
other-
It would be staffing issues, critical staffing such as behavior specialists, disciplinary people, resource officers, a lot of staffing issues, different programming, a lot of parent engagement, recruitment, just really, really vital components to run the school successfully, to not only recruit students, but to keep students engaged. And to also continue the culture that's been so positive at the schools. The SIG funding allows the schools to do that, so it would be very detrimental to the schools if they didn't have that funding. And in terms of the contract, right now, I believe they have 60 days after notifying the Department of Education. In terms of funding, they have 60 days to terminate the contract. So that's something that we absolutely don't want to see happen because we have seen progress, especially in the case of Arlington and Ed Power. So we are very hopeful that we can all work together to get this SIG funding straightened out so that the schools can continue to operate in a manner that's effective.
Okay, so I apologize, but
No,
I
go
appreciate
ahead.
your patience.
Go ahead.
Let me pursue this just a little bit further. So first of all, SIG funding is competitive. So I'd like you to talk about that a little for a second, and then the other thing that might come to mind, or that someone might argue, not me by the way, but someone might argue is, well, you know, how long are you gonna need this extra funding? I thought the idea was to get to a point where you could operate this model on the same, ADM costs that other districts and other, in other words, if we're going to have to keep subsidizing the model with additional funds, could you not argue that anybody, any district, any school could do better if it had these extra funds all the time? I mean, I understand the value or the importance of startup funding, but are you working toward a model where this SIG money or any kind of additional funding is temporary, to be weaned off, to be eventually not necessary? Could you just, and I know you're early into this, so I apologize for that, and maybe
Sure.
Marcus can comment on it a little bit as well, but I think it's important that we address this issue while recognizing the importance of some upfront investments. There's going to be more and more room for criticism if we can't find a way to manage this process longer term without those additional funds. I think, unless you can make a different case to me.
No, I think it's a really good point.
Sorry, there's a lot
And I
there,
think that
know.
our, general perspective here is that these were persistently failing schools for 6, 7, 8, 20 years even. And I think that, turning around a school that has a long-term culture like that takes more than a year. And we believe that the School Improvement Grant Program needs to be implemented for multiple years because we've seen progress at all of these schools, honestly, this year in terms of the culture. We'll probably see some academic results as well. but just, trying to infuse money into schools for 1 year and then completely pulling that back means that the schools have to lose critical staffing, critical after-school programs, critical tutoring that are vital to the culture improvements that we've seen at these schools. And I think that the perspective that we share at the Mayor's Office is the State Board of Education, really took a risk with this and is really making a statement that we can turn around our persistently low-performing schools. We believe that we need, a multi-year investment to make sure that we, have progress that's sustainable. It's my view, and, in a lot of the conversations that we've had with our schools, we've seen progress, but to stop the cash infusion now in terms of the SIG funding, I think would really inhibit the sustainability. To your point, Neil, I think that it's important that we think about long-term funding strategies here, and I don't think that any of us are advocating today that we should have SIG funding for these schools year over year. At the same time, I think it's important that we don't just say, okay, so we're not going to invest in these schools anymore. It's just year 2.
Have all schools that you're overseeing already applied for SIG funding? And if so, did they apply for SIG A or SIG G?
Yeah, so the money, to my understanding, that the turnaround schools received last year was SIG A. SIG G is not the pot of money that they received last year. SIG G applications have already been out. SIG A applications, there's no timeline and there's no actual application for the schools to apply, which is why I think that we wanted to make this an issue at the state board meeting today, because there's no clear timeline or process for the schools to even follow.
Have all your schools applied for G?
I believe that they have, yes.
And it's been a while since I've looked at this, but it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, SIG G is for a 3-year period, whereas SIG A is for a 1-year period. Is that true?
Yeah, it's for 1 year, but it can be renewed.
Yeah, I just want to comment, Dan, before you go, that I think it's important when we look at this that we keep at the forefront of our minds that this isn't Edison, Ed Power asking for money. This is our turnaround. That's right. We have jurisdiction over these schools. We are the ones that took it over. We're the ones who will be judged by the success or failure of this project. So we have to be mindful that we make sure, as a board, we make the resources available for us to be successful. I don't see this as us giving private companies money. This is us putting money available for us to be successful in what we said we were going to do.
I'd like to make, I didn't know when to make this, but there's some new players in the room, and I'm going to go off of what Tony said, because even prior to Tony's service to the board, I've served on the board a lot of years, and I think everybody ought to understand context, how we got here. We had an issue, strategic priority of making sure children graduate with the right skills, attend school. We put great effort into determining where we were. The law was established probably 14 years ago, that if a district, and we didn't really cast aspersions, we just said it hasn't worked for you, you've worked hard, but if a district, and we had 21 schools that were chronically failing, probably 4 years ago we hired consultants to go visit these schools, give ideas, coach governance, coach leaders, coach teachers, and in most cases they went down again. So then we decided to move forward. We had a transition year, which we have a lot of testimony that, not last year, but the year before, the transition year was miserable. But that might be a kind word in some instances. In terms of getting the students and getting things in place, the districts were losing, in their mind, money and power and authority. It seemed like that relationship was very, very difficult. This is the first year out of the gate. If you take a strategic priority and you don't fund it, it's dereliction of duty. And frankly, I went to almost every one of these schools personally, in addition to reading all the reports. Those neighborhoods and these children are vulnerable. And they don't need us coming in and tinkering for a year and leaving them with confusion or not knowing what the application or not giving straight answers. And so as we look at this today in the context of our larger commitment, Tony, I'm playing right off of that, we made a commitment. These are chronically failing schools. The culture was unsafe. The attitude towards children was clearly not in their favor. very detrimental to the neighborhood and community. And we reduced it from 21, of course, because of hard work. In some places, we appointed a partner. And as a board and as a state, it doesn't matter your politics or what side you're in this, we have a commitment to come through here. It's got to be clear, it's got to be swift, it's got to be certain. The young people in these neighborhoods need this. One of the things very clear in our visits is that the starting and stopping of administrators and programs and up and down left confusion. A lot of these neighborhoods and many of these children have disadvantages, and we cannot add another one. And I hear confusion and lack of clarity, and I just want to remind this board that was here when we started this, Dennis wrote, we weren't in for beginners, we were in for conclusions that were positive. And so it is our commitment, we've made it, we have to follow through. And it sounds like this funding thing would be a critical problem.
And I just would urge the board to read the Indianapolis Star article this morning about Arlington. That was kind of a year-end article that, pretty much chronicled the entire school year. And I think what we're seeing is we're seeing signs of progress at these schools. We're not there yet. We're not even close to being there yet. But what, has really happened at all 4 schools is the culture is beginning to shift, which I think says that we do have some early signs that it's working. To not fund these schools at the same levels next year, I think would, really make it a challenge to long-term sustain that approach.
Those hearings as well, and you just can't overemphasize how much people from the community, teachers, students, parents, stress the need for stability and continuity, that the constant kind of pulling out of principles, of changing programs, one year you're doing this math program, the next year you're doing that one, just really was enormously disadvantageous to the children and to the ability to learn. And so, again, the plea for, and I know this is what you're trying to do, but the plea for stability, we've got to give this several years. We've got to see if it works. We've got very hopeful signs of progress. To your point, still a long way to go, and obviously we haven't seen the scores. The first year, we've got to be reasonable. We don't expect the scores to be, 100% higher than they were, but there are elements, even within the reports of the TSOs, there are signs of progress. They're not consistent enough, they're not large enough yet, but they're heading in the right direction. And so so for that reason, and also again, we just can't afford to shift and change strategies again right now.
And I just want to be a little more clear. All right, Roosevelt is my neighborhood school. And as a community, we cannot afford to lose another $1.3 million to help the students in that community. It doesn't matter to me who it goes to, whether it's Edison and Garrett Community School Corporation. We need the funds in the community to help those students. And I think we need to stop playing with this and look seriously at doing the SIG-G for all the turnaround operators.
Thank you for your effort.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Is that Power speaking?
Yes.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back before you. I'm not going to wag my finger and say you got me into this, but you got me into this. I'm joined this morning by Dr. Dinah Stevens, who is our Chief Academic Officer and has been a part of our organization from the very beginning. This has been an interesting journey for us. As some of you might be well aware, we were invited to become turnaround operators and to apply to be part of the process. And so as a small nonprofit, it took a lot for us to consider going into this area. Every resource in our organization is incredible and important. We serve poor kids across our entire network and not just at Arlington. And so It took a lot for us to make this decision, to come forward and to volunteer to be a part of the work. And it has become important work to us and to our board of directors. And so we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about where we find ourselves at the end of the year. At a high level, probably 5 things I want to highlight this morning. First, year 1 focus on school culture was absolutely essential. Secondly, the academic growth in the school is projected beyond what we articulated in our Turnaround Schools proposal. Professional development for our young staff is essential to year 2. Stabilize the culture, but then you've really got to get down to instruction. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're up to as far as that's concerned. Student assignment continues to be an issue, not just for Arlington, but for the reform in general. Really trying to figure out where kids belong and how that communication change should work. And last but certainly not least, we'd like to talk about funding to meet the objectives that we articulated in our proposal. So let's start with culture, safety, security, and school life. I think I said to you once upon a time that I found the kids at Arlington to be really the most abandoned and disenfranchised kids I'd ever come across. Arlington, for us, was, when we went through in our transition year, one of the most unsafe places any of us had ever been. My first trip to Arlington was in a suit, and I never went back in that transition year in a suit. Khaki pants and sensible shoes. Because the level of violence in the school was untenable. I mean, it's just unrealistic that a school should be staffed the way it was staffed, 7+ school administrators, 3 full-time school police officers, myriad other kind of associate deans and support staff, and they still couldn't stabilize the place. And so from our standpoint, we understood going through the door that if we can't do something about the physical and the psychic safety of the kids, there's just no way we're ever going to get down to learning. And one of the things that shocked us even more than the fact that it was violent and chaotic was that there was no plan to remedy the violence and the chaos. That the single gender program that had been proposed was supposed to be the answer to the violence and the chaos. And so under the circumstances, if Arlington had continued down that road, it would be worse, not better, because at the time there was no plan to make it any different. And so one of the things we did was put together a police detail, not just for Arlington, but for our entire network of schools, having them based ostensibly at Arlington because we see more incidences at Arlington than in other places. 5 to 7 folks to cover halls, which in this day and age sounds strange, but if you've ever been to Arlington, it's 380,000 square feet of architectural mess. There are 19 different points of penetration, there are 2 interior courtyards, countless stairwells, and what we observed in our observation year was that kids were floating everywhere. And there was just no way to contain them because you didn't have enough adult presence in the hallway to monitor the coming and the going of the kids. And so we tried to make sure that we could deal with that. In this particular year, our school police saw a really disturbing array of criminal behaviors throughout the school year. I don't know what we would have done actually had we hired traditional security officers as opposed to sworn police officers, because we saw everything from cyber crimes to sexual assault to weapons to assault. And I don't know how a traditional school would deal with the onslaught, narcotics, of these kinds of behaviors at the school level and across the continuum of kids from the 12-year-old 7th graders on up to the 19 and 20-year-old sophomores through seniors. And so one of the things that we knew we had to do was to secure the place and to make sure that kids felt like they can come and go unaccosted. And the feedback we got from the kids was they never felt that way at Arlington, that they could just come and go unaccosted. And so that's a win for us. School life, though, on the backside of that was also important. You got to give kids something to believe in. And the school was totally dismantled, not just in terms of its academic systems, there were none, its operational systems, there were none, but also in terms of school life. As you well know, instruments mysteriously disappeared and reappeared. athletic equipment taken from the school and not returned. And so everything that was about the co-curricular experience for kids in the school had been ripped out of that school and appropriated to some other place. And so when I gave the commencement address, one of the things that made me choke up was this band that started with 6 or 7 kids in the drum line playing for the graduates as they process in. For Mr. Younger to have gone from 6 kids to a full 40-piece band, we did put those instruments back the way we needed to put them back. For me, it was astounding and amazing. I said to the kids, what people believed about you and what you've been able to prove for yourself is absolutely astounding. And so we've hired a full-time athletic director to put the athletic program back together. Club sponsors, co-curricular programs in partnership with community organizations. We have to give life back to Arlington. And at this particular time, that had been ripped from the kids.
One of the points that probably ought to be made very clearly here, last year at this time, then you were coming in at a severe deficit.
Yeah.
Material, equipment that the taxpayers bought for those children was gone.
Sure. Sure.
So you not only had to operate a school, you had to rebuild a lot of fundamentals. This is very expensive.
Sure. Absolutely. And so
we had vulnerable children going to a school that wasn't working very well, and on top of that, kind of gave a good kick on the way out, looks like.
So it would appear, yes, that the best stuff in the school had been appropriated to other places. And we only know that because we did an inventory in January, and by the time we came back in July, a number of those things had disappeared. They had all been barcoded and counted, and they were all gone. Some of those things did come back, but they were not the original equipment because they didn't bear the barcodes we put on them in January. So we know for a fact that the equipment that returned, that to our eye looked used and older, was not the equipment that we saw in January when we did our original inventory on the behalf of the Department of Education. And so in year 2, we're going to have a real focus on building school spirit. We have kids, I believe, who feel safe at Arlington. We want kids who feel great at Arlington. And that's about more than just the academic experience, and we're going to put some focus on that in year 2. We know first and foremost that Arlington is a school, and so it doesn't matter how we build school spirit if we don't have the kind of outcomes. We propose to you certain outcomes in our turnaround school application, and we actually were a little skeptical. It took us a while to do those indicators for you, to come up with those outcomes, to set a goal, because given the level of chaos, we just weren't sure that we were in a position to move the needle as far as academics is concerned. However, we did set goals, which I'll speak to in a minute, and with the exception of the Biology 1 ECA, we predict that we'll exceed our goals in every one of those indicators. Of course, the ISTEP data isn't available right now, and so we have used the Acuity Predictive Assessment, also by CTB McGraw-Hill, to predict what we think will be our ISTEP pass rate. So having said that, and I apologize that this is so hard to read, but at grade 7, in 2011 and 2010, 2011, 26.8% of ELA kids passed in grade 7. By 11-12, that was 27%. We predict, based on our acuity scores, that we'll have 33% pass, which is about what our goal was. In math, 23.9% of the 7th graders passed in 10-11, 32.9% in 11-12, and we're predicting 42% of our kids will pass in math in grade 7. In grade 8, 26.8% of the English kids passed. That fell to 23.7 in 11-12. We're projecting 47% pass based on acuity. 21.7% in math, 32.4% the following year in 11-12, our observation year. We believe we'll go to 37%. Most remarkable, when you look at first-time ECA takers at the high school, in English 10, 32.9% pass, in 10-11, 43.7% pass, and we're projecting 51% of the kids who took the English 10 ECA, they did pass first-time test takers. So those are real numbers. Algebra 1, 16.4%, and then 16.8%, and 26% of the kids passed this year. Our only disappointment was we knew biology would be a hurdle. We hoped we'd get to 14. We got to 11, which is actually a decline. I will tell you transparently that we spent a lot of time focusing on English language arts and mathematics as the two most visible indicators, and I'm not convinced that we spend a whole lot of time strengthening science instruction this year. We will next year.
As an educator, there are certain metrics that would help you evaluate the student body's capability and learning background, capability, but predictive how they might perform based on past performance. Is your student body in 12, 13, are there educational indicators that they were just a better group, a better cohort of students, or worse, or the same?
Hard to say. It was hard to get the data on the kids from the previous years, some of their more diagnostic and formative data. And so what we know is when you look at the NWEA administrations, for some of these kids at grade 7 and 8, we're looking at 4th and 5th grade reading levels, 4th and 5th grade math skills. And so I didn't bring the NWEA data, but I'm happy to send it to you. You can see that a lot of these kids grew at least a year, some grew 2 years over the course of the school year. So we do know that these kids came in at a severe deficit. I spend a lot of time in this community talking about our talent pool and how we need to strengthen it. As you might imagine, when you have a school that has been at the level of decline that Arlington has been at, then you don't exactly get people beating down the door to come teach. And so we've essentially had really young teachers in terms of age and relative experience. And so we've had to invest a great deal of time trying to train those teachers to be effective for the kids at Arlington. Even those folks who come out of traditional education programs at the post-secondary level. And so this year, Dr. Stevens and her team have even beefed up our professional development model. We have a summer teaching institute that takes our teachers through 3 to 4 weeks of urban teacher training. And we've restructured some of our administrative capacity to drive more direct instructional support into the school. And so when it comes to making sure we have the teachers we need, we know we have to build those teachers. It won't be a function of being able to recruit them because they're just not applying to work in these schools. Certainly we have some concerns about student assignment. It's an ongoing concern for me. I think at some point we just have to decide who do the kids belong to, how is that effectively communicated. So with respect to the boundaries and how students are assigned, we still don't quite know how that works. We just only a couple weeks ago received our list of kids in the boundary area that are coming to Arlington from an IPS elementary, about 198 kids. We received records last week, only 112 records for 198 kids, and 2 of those kids are not even on the original list. And so we don't take that to mean that there's anything problematic with the school system. Certainly with plus 30,000 kids, they have enough on their plates in terms of student assignment. But I think at some point from a reform standpoint, we just got to figure out who the kids belong to, how we communicate that effectively, and how we make those communications early. Because when these kids come in 3-4 grade levels behind, we really can't afford to get that information a week before the kid joins, especially when you're swallowing 200. And so under the circumstance, that's a big issue.
Just on that point, 2 questions, I guess. One, have you made any representations to the IPS board at all about this issue? Secondly, I guess kind of connected, can the mayor's office is now kind of a, in a sense, an intermediary between the state board and your efforts. Can the mayor's office presumably have closer ties to IPS than the state board certainly does? Is there any way that they can be of assistance to you in trying to resolve some of these issues?
I think so. because I just think we have to have a meaningful conversation about how it goes down and what the rules and parameters are. Because right now it's sort of the wild, wild west as far as that's concerned. I think we've enjoyed even better relations with Indianapolis Public Schools given the change in administration, and so we see that as a positive sign. So I don't get the impression that there's resistance necessarily, but I just think there aren't any rules, and when there aren't any rules, then you can't really set any priorities. I want to keep reiterating that we are a not-for-profit organization. And so, since we launched our first school in 2004, this whole question of what it means to educate urban kids and the expense of that has been very present for us. And so we don't get a remarkably different kid in our charter schools than we see in the turnaround school. We understand that challenge. We also understand how expensive that is. And so under the circumstances, when you start to look at how we staff for Arlington, it's not just about operational viability, which is to say, I staff the building based on student count. The number of teachers we employ, the number of administrators that are on board are based on the number of kids who are actually assigned to the school. However, I have organizational capacity that lives above the school that has to support that school on an ongoing basis. Whether it's summer work or the everyday kind of instructional audits, cultural audits, fiscal support and viability, compliance, state reporting. We have to have a network infrastructure above Arlington that supports the work. Otherwise, there's no way this school could survive in turnaround status without, with the added distraction of curriculum and instruction, back office administration and finance, and the list goes on of the services that are driven from the network. And so from our standpoint, I think what we would want everyone to understand is EdPower does not have a binder. We're not operating a program out of a box. We're not just sending Arlington a plan for them to execute. We have a very specific, individualistic, data-driven, and instructionally focused model that requires us to spend a lot of contact time. We've got a camera that we paid for in every single classroom in Arlington just so we can monitor effectively, both from the school and away from the site, what's transpiring for kids in those classrooms. And so from our standpoint, when you start to talk about the school improvement grant, SIG-A is critical for our continued work. We would love to get SIG-G, because SIG-G would allow us to do some of the things that we're not going to be able to do based on the ADM. When you start talking about behavioral support for the corridors, if we don't get SIG-G, we're going to have to pull that behavioral support out of the school. And I have some concerns about our ability to be able to effectively supervise 380,000 square feet without it. So SIG-G brings to the table even more instructional support for our teachers, and that's fabulous. But SIG-A honestly just has less strings and allows us to perform the management function for the school in the way that we need to perform it. And so our priority, we would say from our organization, is definitely the SIG-A funding because it allows us to do what we do. SIG-G will bring some enhancements, and so we welcome it. I want to say we really want it. But SIG-A is SIG-A is the priority. And so without the funding at 2012, 2013 levels, we're not convinced we'll be able to continue the work that we've been doing. Because ultimately we'd have to go out and find funding. And given the fact that we don't get any capital support on the charter side, all of our fundraising really is kind of devoted in shoring up that deficit on the charter side of the house. So I don't have the internal capacity to go out and raise the money to support the network infrastructure that Arlington definitely, desperately needs in order to be successful. And so under the circumstances, I will questions.
I just want to thank you for your engagement. You've been very good about kind of keeping the board updated. It was a good story in the Star today, and I'm glad to see that you're making progress. Really appreciate your engagement with this and your dedication to it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm focused on cash flow.
Sure.
What is the state of your knowledge with regard to available cash flow to start the next school year as it relates to SIG A, SIG G, or any other sources from the state of Indiana?
Yeah, so we already did some budget reductions based on what we knew would be a reduction in ADM, just in terms of how the funding formula works. Relative to SIG A, without SIG A, we can't start the next school year.
I understand that. What's the state of your knowledge of the availability? Where are you in the process of?
So we've been in contact with the Department of Education, both in turnaround and chief of staff. And so we're optimistic we'll have some conversations tomorrow. They're getting up to speed tomorrow. So they're getting up to speed, and we want to be a partner in helping them get up to speed. But as Brandon indicated, currently there is no application for SIG A, nor any timeline that's been iterated to us.
No application, meaning you haven't submitted it or you haven't?
It doesn't exist. Well, I'm sorry, it isn't available online. And so we haven't received an application at this
You
point.
couldn't have applied if you wanted to?
No, sir. We have applied for SIG G, which we didn't apply for last year. And so I'm not exactly sure the circumstances around how that was made available. So we did apply for SIG G. We're excited about that. We've also applied for a federal AmeriCorps grant to support the school as well. We're optimistic about that. The feds are pushing back and asking some questions. And so we're figuring if they're asking some questions, we're still in the hunt. And so that AmeriCorps grant could also put some additional needed bodies into the building to support the kids.
When you ask for the application for SIG A, what's the answer?
It just hasn't been released yet.
But you need to know that.
We do. And so we have contracts we're supposed to execute July 1st. We've got folks who have
Does the
decided.
department know that you need to know that? Is there any confusion here?
I don't think so. We've got contracts, you know, the school year for us ends, the fiscal year ends June 30. Our contract to do the work essentially ends June 30. So we really got to actually execute the contract for year 2 operation. And so I think everyone's aware, and I'm hopeful that the department will feel, as we feel, the urgency around getting through all of this so we can get the kids served July 1st.
Does the department have somebody here from Title? Are there people out there? Scott? Is there somebody here from Title I?
Madam Superintendent, I see you first. I don't want to ask these questions.
Yeah, is she here?
She's not in the building, she's on my iPad answering my question.
Oh, she is.
She's here right now. So basically, the paper timeline is the release date was supposed to be June 19th. She said they're a few days behind. The paper applications are due back from the schools July 24th. The review and score window is from July 24th through August 7th for those dollars.
And that's for application A.
How does that help you? In August, mid-August, you want to know then?
No. Our board is going to need some indication, you know, really by the end of the month, because again, they've got to execute contracts with staff. And so, you know, for us, this is not extra money. It's how we've proposed the reform in general. And so we simply cannot operate the school without access to those SIG dollars.
Well, it might also be important to note that you came in not only a long history of underperformance, serious underperformance, lack of culture and violence, but material that was supposed to be there was gone. So you really started.
Sure. We had to go out and buy books. We had to invest in technology. Basically, we had to put school back together. We didn't even have a stay-up for transcripts to send records out. We had
And
to,
last year in May, you were notified.
yes.
The mayor's office indicated that you all have a 60-day out clause in your contract.
Yes.
I don't recall. Is there any provision for what happens if that's executed? I mean, what?
No, I mean, I don't think, I mean, those are really important questions. And I don't think,
Well, we just send out notices in August, okay, Arlington doesn't exist anymore. I mean, what happens?
I think that'd be catastrophic. You know, this school means a lot to a lot of people. whether it's the Arlington alumni who've been invested from the very beginning. Vivica Fox came all the way back from Hollywood to be a part of the relaunch of the high school. The folks are older people who own homes around Arlington High School and are really thrilled about the decrease in gang violence and drug abuse, because they know in the neighborhood there are real police officers at Arlington and they are not playing. To the kids who believe in the school and stayed. I mean, these were kids who were encouraged to leave. Some were ported to other schools even without their parents' knowledge. And so under the circumstances, these are kids who took a stand and said, I wanted something different and I want it in my high school. And so in my estimation, it'd be catastrophic, not just because we don't have a plan for what happens next, but for all the promises that we've made. You want to say something?
I guess so, yeah, and if it's okay. I just want to reiterate the community and student partnerships that have been formed and how important that is to the students. For example, the students are working with the community to redesign and revitalize the bus stop across the street, and they've just been, I don't know, things are just very exciting there. They're becoming so much more engaged, not only in their education and their learning, but other kinds of activities like the band. And really, there was so little there when we came in that had to be replaced or purchased. And so I'm just reiterating what's already been said, but I think it's exciting that the things that have been happening there, the academic successes that we're seeing, and we hope to continue the work.
Is there any discrepancy in dates from last year to this year that we are aware of?
Yeah.
Back to typing. She responded that town Henry A monies last year were released July 11th and were actually in advance. I'm trying just to confirm the difference in
Right,
the two
because
timelines.
I was under the assumption that we were really on the same timeline, if not earlier, than the A application last year. Because we had some review with title regarding both of these grant pieces. SIG-G money has already been processed, I believe.
Applications were received, and I believe for the turnaround operators did apply, and they're reviewing them right now.
Yes, we have conversation tomorrow
Right, yes.
regarding that. And then the A is, to my knowledge, is really on the same timeline that we have been on.
Is that the one
In the
that
past.
was May last?
Yeah, how could that be?
I don't know what was done in May.
What did you receive in May last year? A written confirmation you did it, or what?
Absolutely. We received from the department an indication that we would get SIG A, because that was necessary.
Because
Yeah, I don't know how their application process worked. All I know, we filed ours, and we knew before July 1st what our allocation was. Our drawdown wasn't until July 11th.
that
but
may have been
was
something
processed.
that wasn't formalized. I just know, and I thought we were right on track to release all of the grants as we normally do. And so I'm personally not aware of anything that happened in May regarding
Sure.
applications or distribution of monies in May last year to any school.
If I understood correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, if the city's doing it, that there was confirmation that you would receive the money
Right.
in May. Today, you don't even have an application to apply for the money.
Right.
But there can't be a confirmation when there's not an application process. I mean,
I
Dr.
know.
Bennett may have said, hey, we can get you some money when we get our SIG grant money in.
No, they had confirmation in May and received the money in July.
Right.
Well, if you
They
could,
don't have an application yet. They're trying to plan. You see, when you run a budget and you hire people, you got to have a runway. These are real people in a real neighborhood that need real commitments, and you need a runway to do it. They can't wait till August to know if they're going to have the money to operate this critically important school to these children.
School year starts.
Well, what's your first day of school?
Yeah.
well, we will investigate, but I think the actual giving out of the money happened at approximately the same time that it's going to happen now. But if you've got something written, some kind of confirmation in May, I would like to have a copy of that.
Okay.
Because personally, I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
So I'm aware of the process that's been gone through for the application process from the federal government, because we're talking federal government money here. So, and I thought we were right on target with what has happened in the past. So I would love to have a copy of that. That'd be helpful to us, actually.
Sure, and we appreciate some things get lost in translation. I think the big issue for us is we start training teachers in July. That I know of, Charter Schools USA is going to be doing July work.
Well, the SIG-G money is going to be finalized, so that monies will be sent out like it normally is. So, okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just one question for you, in light of
Sure.
the fact of where this conversation is heading. Are the SIG, and forgive my ignorance, but are the SIG monies the only funds that could potentially be available to support the turnarounds beyond the kind of normal, ADM funding, or are there other pots of money potentially?
To my knowledge, those are the two funds that can be utilized for turnaround and school improvement.
That's what I thought. But
There's a statutory provision that requires this board to ensure adequacy of funds for turnaround capital. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right about that. So I think we've got, whatever the sources are, I think we've got an obligation to satisfy ourselves today, given the fact that, and the facts are clear, the money was received in early July last year.
Yes.
So the money needs, if there's going to be money, it needs to be received in early July this year to hold to the same schedule, and that fits the planning schedule that Dan alluded to. It seems to me we've got an affirmative obligation under statute to make sure that we're comfortable these folks have adequate resources. And there's a timing issue. It's a real timing issue.
Well,
How do we resolve? I guess I'll put that question up in the air and we can think about it after.
sure. And I guess I would add also that there's an obligation for the process for all the schools competing for the funds, because we have many applications that are part of what, and
That's SIG money.
SIG-G has,
I
you're talking
understand.
about
I'm
other
talking-
funds?
I'm talking about, under the laws of the state, if I read them right, we've got an affirmative obligation to ensure that there's adequate resources for the turnaround academy. I don't feel very comfortable reaching that conclusion at the moment.
There are a lot of schools and they have a lot of needs. We worked very hard over a long period of time to identify the most critical needs, and then even after we identified it, it seemed like the schools were left in quite a disadvantage. So we have a leadership responsibility to come through for these children. We started off on a critical path here with a strategic priority. So all of a sudden you don't just say, well, now we're going to look at some other stuff. Let's stay the course and get this right. These are critical areas that have critical needs. Courageous leaders have taken it on. We have to follow through. So it isn't just 6 of one, half dozen another. This is a priority. We established it. And I don't really need to make any points other than keep the face of the young people in that community in our mind. They've been through a very difficult and long period where the school did not function. Matter of fact, it was very violent and scary. So now we're in there, we have to follow through. And I think there's, I don't know how many millions and even probably billions of dollars go through here. I think we do. If I read the statute last week, the board has to make sure the funding's there. And so we ought to get it done, we ought to get it done on time.
Dave's comment, what Dan was just saying is, Indiana Code 20-31-9.53 says that the board shall determine the amount of state tuition support and federal funds that are necessary to fund options for improvement implemented by the state board under the chapter with respect to each turnaround academy.
I mean, there's probably, it's hard to imagine a bigger priority in our department right now.
Thank you. We appreciate the partnership from the State Board as well as the department. Thank you.
So I don't think we have anybody present from Charter USA. Edison.
Good morning.
If you could introduce
Good to-
yourselves.
Yes, good to see you again. My name is Todd McIntyre. I'm Senior Vice President for Operations with Edison Learning. And with me today is Donna Henry, who's the principal of Theodore Roosevelt College and Career Academy.
Good morning, everyone.
Thank you again for having us. I think before we begin our presentation, I would just offer one or two items to the conversation that you've just had from our perspective. We certainly agree with the presentations from the mayor's office and from Ed Power. I can say with absolute certainty that the department last year conveyed its priorities very clearly to us, and I assume to the other turnaround providers, about how it intended to fund the turnaround and how it intended to use dollars. Of course, we had to submit an application for any SIG funds, as is required by the federal regulations. But the department was very clear, particularly with the 1003A funds, that those were going to be used to support turnaround schools, which are the lowest performing schools in the state. I would also add, we have also applied for a 1003G grant for the forthcoming year. We would very much like to be able to apply for a 1003A grant as well, because of the flexibility. As we've talked about many times throughout this year, we have a facility that has been neglected in many ways, largely because of lack of funds that were available, much deferred maintenance, and we've had to spend federal dollars to take care of some of those essential issues which we couldn't get addressed other ways. Only the 1003A funds can be used for those kinds of improvements to a school. SIG-G is not available for that purpose.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So did you receive those monies in May and have an application already completed?
No, I concur completely with what Marcus said, which is that the department indicated its priorities very clearly to us as we were developing budgets for the first year. They looked at our budgets and the assumptions that we were making for federal funding, gave us indications of whether those assumptions were accurate. But then we had to complete an application. We had to go through the process just like any other. But we had very clear indications of the level of funding. That's right.
Everybody knew.
Yes.
The lowest performing schools were going to be very important to us.
That's correct. Yeah, those priorities were spelled out very clearly, I think, to all the providers in terms of the level of fundings that could be expected.
I'm sorry, can I elaborate on that? You didn't actually receive cash until early July,
That's correct.
but you knew the department had conveyed its priority that you would get the funds.
Assuming we did our part, that we completed an application, that the application was acceptable, that it was competitive, et cetera, yes. So the priorities were established.
Danielle, can you find out for me, because I really need to get a handle on this. Can you find out from Ms. Hurst if the applications and the money were dispersed last year in July, as been stated?
I can say that the 1003G grants for this year will be awarded in July 2013, is what she just
Okay.
said. I can find out the history from last year, but it sounds like, based on the answer you just
The
gave.
1003 grants are due to be awarded as they should in July?
Yes.
And the 1003A?
Are the other, Teresa, I'm looking
Can-
to you. Yeah.
Can you find when they were awarded last year? Thank you.
The last comment I'd make on that, and really is the beginning of our presentation, is our goal, our vision for Roosevelt is that every student proficient and prepared for college and careers. We're not there yet. Our goal is to get there. We have many more students that are proficient and prepared this year after 1 year of working on this initiative. But when the department established this program of Turnaround Academies, it was a 4-year program. And we put together a plan that's a 4-year plan. We could not, in the first year, fund all of the interventions and all of the programs that we felt like will be essential to get every student proficient and prepared for college and careers. And so 1 year in, we're very happy with our progress. We feel like we reversed a number of trends that were in place at Roosevelt before we started with the turnaround. Enrollment had been dropping precipitously over the last several years, and we stabilized enrollment. We had almost exactly the same number of students enrolled on the last day of school as we did on the first day of school. Indications are that enrollment will actually be higher next year. We changed the culture. We'll talk about that in more detail. The focus is on learning, and achievement is going up, and there are some very strong indicators of that. And there's been a tremendous level of community support for the school that we think we can articulate in very substantive ways. We sent to the department a packet of about 8 or 10 letters of support that we received from parents and community members. I don't know if those were forwarded to you, but if not, we'll make sure that we get those to you, because we want you to get how the community, parents, and other stakeholders are feeling about the turnaround that's happening at Roosevelt. We're 1 year in. We thank you for the support that you've provided in the past, and we're very excited about the progress we're making.